honored to be speaking with you right now.
I'm honored to be here.
This is wild, and let me tell you why.
Okay.
Your voice is in my head. It speaks to me, and it urges me. It's sort of like you are sort of like one of my ServiceNow angels. So let me start off this interview properly. I am here with Cory, CJ Wesley. What can I say? There's so much. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Cory.
Oh, wow. So where do you want me to start? First of all, hopefully I'm the bad angel in your voice, not the good one. We can leave that for the Duke. But yeah, I mean, so I've been in the ServiceNow ecosystem for 11 years, been doing the CJ and the Duke podcast for the last 3, co-hosting it with my buddy, Robert the Duke Fedoric. I'm in a Dev MVP program, right? And so that allowed me to participate in some of the Rise Up marketing campaigns. So you might see my picture on the wall here at Knowledge. It's in the keynote, didn't know that was gonna happen. That was awesome. Yeah, I've been having a great knowledge. So yeah, that's me right now, right? Like I'm just, I've been doing the service now forever. I'm an independent consultant. I love giving back to the folks who gave to me to get me here, right? And so that's why I do a lot of what I do, right? It's all about just giving back to the community that was existing when I got into it to make sure that it still exists for the folks who come after me.
I think you're being a little bit modest. Your picture's everywhere. I think that you have officially, maybe unofficially, been anointed the king of ServiceNow. Your picture is in lights. You are everywhere, and for good reason. I know of your work because of CJ and the Duke.
Right.
When I came to ServiceNow less than a year ago, I just put in ServiceNow into the Googler, and CJ and the Duke podcast popped up.
No way.
That's how I found out. And I am true to the gospel of CJ and the Duke, and let me tell you why.
Okay.
Those podcast episodes are like mini master classes. And when I was coming into ServiceNow, I mean, obviously there's Now Learning, which is phenomenal, and
right.
You go through there for, paths and learning paths, all of that. But what you and the Duke were doing, we're talking about ServiceNow in a very practical way. And you were talking a language that I understood. I want to know a little bit about how and why you started that podcast and what are the goals?
So I started it because, when I was getting interviewed yesterday before the keynote, one of the things that I said was just to say yes to everything, right? So Robert came to me and was like, hey, let's do a podcast. I was like, no. I don't have anything to say. He came back like a day later. It's like, yeah, man, let's do this podcast. And I was like, all right, let's do it then. So I was like, yeah, let's do it. Let's see what happens, right? Started the podcast, boom, here I am, right? Dev MVP program, same thing, right? Like he was like, hey man, why aren't you a Dev MVP? It's like, man, I don't know. I just do a podcast. He's like, no, man, you do a lot. He's like, I'm gonna nominate you, right? And boom, here I am. Right, and so I said yes, right? So it's all about saying yes for me and just putting myself in positions where where opportunities flow and then saying yes to them to get to the next stage.
It's interesting that you said that you made a commitment to say yes because throughout the event floor,
no,
your power word yes is like bold throughout the event floor. Yes, yes, yes.
So I'm gonna tell you, so what's so funny about this is completely not coordinated with ServiceNow at all. Like you would think because I'm all over the place that we coordinated this marketing kind of message of say yes. No, it's just how I live, right? Like you get opportunity and you say yes to it, and if you do that enough, you might fail sometimes, but you're going to succeed more than you fail. And the more that you succeed, the better off you are, right? In terms of position and aspiring and moving forward, right? So everything to me is about when opportunities present themselves to say yes to them and see what happens, right? You can always say no later, right? After you try it. Right, and in terms of you asked me about like being practical in terms of how we do guidance on the podcast. For me, it's all about connecting with the folks who are actually doing the work. Right, and we don't need to be like high-minded or highbrow entertainment for that. Let's talk about what we're actually doing day by day, and give like a blueprint for folks to kind of get to where we are, right? Because some of this stuff was like trial and error, like being an independent consultant. It was kind of hard to kind of figure out like how that was going to work. So I love giving that kind of advice back for folks so they can catch up.
You talked about giving back, and I feel that your podcast is tremendously does that. I'm curious about what your early days were like. Did you wake up like this?
So like in the ServiceNow world, no. Actually, so the funny thing is I would have considered myself an introvert until maybe 2018/2019. And some unrelated ServiceNow stuff, some stuff unrelated to ServiceNow happened. I got into local politics, and you can't be like into local politics without talking to people, right? And without being in front of people and talking. So that kind of prepared me a little bit, I think, for the podcast, right? Was just basically getting out in front of people and getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, right? And so when we started doing the podcast, it was sort of the same thing. It's like I'm talking to a bunch of people. They're not in the room, but like your mind is thinking like, how many people are listening to this? What are they thinking about your every word? But the more you practice that, the more you kind of get beyond it. And then it's just like, I want to share, right? Like I just want to help. And so you get out of your own mind and you think about the value that you're creating for others, and that's what keeps you going.
Speaking of local politics, one of my favorite episodes of CJ and the Duke is one of the more recent episodes.
Okay.
And it's the requirement gathering episode you did about creating an app for your run in local politics.
Yeah.
Love that episode because it's so practical. Share with me some of your favorite episodes of the podcast.
Yeah, so that one was one of them too, right? Because I was literally knee deep in a campaign right then, and the requirements gathering session that we did really helped me out in terms of like organizing my thoughts and thinking through some of the things that I needed to do, right? So that one, I really love the ones that we do about like, what is it to be an architect, or what is it to be a business analyst, or what is it to be an implementer, right? I really do love those too, because I think we started like a very kind of practical 0 step, and then walk folks through to what the end game looks like. And then, you know, a few points along the way, right, so you can judge your progress. You know, and I think a lot of folks are looking for that step-by-step guide. I know in a lot of places, not just in ServiceNow, but in the world, like that step-by-step guide doesn't always exist. And folks, a lot of folks like really need that kind of blueprint. And so I think by creating that, it helps a lot more people kind of get onboarded into ServiceNow. It removes some of that intimidation factor, and it also allows them to know that success is possible because they can see it in the people who are talking about it.
Yeah. And congratulations, by the way. I understand that you won that campaign bid, so congratulations to you.
Thank you.
Yesterday, during Bill McDermott's keynote address,
yes,
he spent a good deal of the first part of that address talking about Rise Up, which you are the king of, the face of. And to give folks who don't know, it is his ambitious plan to skill up 1 million people in the ServiceNow ecosystem by the end of 2024.
Yes.
Can you share some advice for people who are just now breaking into the ecosystem, whether they are right out of college, perhaps out of the military, or perhaps a midlife career pivoter such as myself? Right. What are some of the things that you might say to kind of move them along their journey?
Oh, that's awesome. First, I want to give a shout out to everybody else who's in the Rise Up campaign with me. It's too many to name, but we were all awesome, and we had such a good time doing that photo shoot and those videos, and some of the stuff you didn't see was just so wild, right? Like, it was awesome. But the things that I would say to folks who, and yeah, in ServiceNow, like this whole Rise Up campaign is a huge priority for them. As you can see, like Bill spent a good portion of the keynote on it. But the thing for me in terms of like connecting with folks and saying, okay, so how do you get at the beginning, how do you take that beginning part and like go through the process? For me, it's about removing those barriers, right? And removing those hurdles and making things easier to digest. Like, you don't know what you don't know, and so trying to give folks like some information so they can start to know the unknowns actually is what I think actually helps folks out a lot, right? Because once you look at ServiceNow and you look at, say, like you go to Now Learning or whatever, it's really technical. It's really good technical information though, but it's really technical. And if you have no idea what ServiceNow is about, you kind of get blown away a little bit. But if you come listen to the podcast and we start talking about running an ice cream shop with ServiceNow and how things are like a task and a form and a requirement and an approval, right? All of a sudden, this is putting it in practical terms that you've probably dealt with your entire life, right? And so that just really kind of reorientates how you think about the platform, right? And so that's what I really think is probably the key to any success that we're having. It's just by removing like a lot of those hurdles that you get by looking at purely technical information and digest it into a point where it's just kind of life experience.
You saying that also reminds me that, if I understand correctly, CJ and the Duke podcast is now become integrated into part of the learning path through Now Learning. Tell me a little bit more about that. Do I have that correct?
God, this has been such a great knowledge, right? So, yes. Looked up last week to find that our episode on how to be an implementer is one of the preferred listening tools now for Now Learning, and like just completely blown away. Like I can't express like how awesome it is to look at official ServiceNow curriculum and see my podcast there, right? Like to hear my voice and to see that I'm like ordained, so to speak, right? Like it's one of the voices that folks should listen to in order to get onto the ServiceNow track. It's just truly amazing, and I'm truly honored.
All right, Cory, CJ, Wesley, final question.
Sure.
What is your superpower?
Ooh, superpower. Yeah, so my badge, my title says Chief Problem Solver. That's my superpower, right? Solving problems. I can see kind of any kind of problem. I can distill it. I can create a solution. Then I can communicate that out in a way that everyone understands it. So solving problems is my superpower.
And you heard it right here. I'm Kylie Alexander. We're at Knowledge 2023. And as Bill McDermott says, what happens in Vegas must leave Vegas. And I am here with Cory, CJ, Chief Problem Solver Wesley. Let's go.